Some heirlooms are sacred. My wedding dress, the last gift my dying mother created with her own hands, was mine. So when my sister-in-law Talia showed up at my door with tears in her eyes, demanding to wear it for her own wedding, and my husband Rowan casually said, "It's just one day, Ev," something cold and certain settled in my chest. I smiled and nodded as I handed over my mother's final masterpiece, but behind that smile, a plan was forming. They mistook my politeness for permission to rewrite my story. They were about to discover just how dangerous that assumption could be. I still remember the day I first saw my wedding dress. It wasn't hanging in some overpriced boutique or displayed on a glossy magazine page. It was draped across my mother's hospital bed, her tired fingers tracing the delicate lace she'd selected herself. "Every woman deserves to feel like the heroine of her own story on her wedding day," she'd whispered, her voice growing weaker by the day. "This dress is your armor, Evelyn. Wear it with pride." 3 months later, she was gone. The dress became more than fabric and thread. It became her final gift to me. My mother had worked with a local seamstress for months, even as cancer slowly claimed her strength. The result was breathtaking: vintage-inspired lace bodice with hand-sewn pearl detailing, flowing into a modest A-line skirt that seemed to catch the light just so. Not ostentatious, not showy, just perfectly, unmistakably mine. When I married Rowan Kessler 2 years ago, I felt my mother's presence in every stitch. The dress had been preserved afterward, carefully sealed away in a specialized box in the spare room closet. I would sometimes open it just to run my fingers along the fabric, remembering. I suppose that's why what happened next felt like such a violation. It started innocently enough at Sunday dinner with Rowan's family. We'd gathered at his parents' sprawling colonial-style home in the suburbs, the kind of place where napkins matched the tablecloth and silver was actually silver. Cynthia Kessler, my mother-in-law, had prepared her famous beef Wellington, which meant something important was happening. In the 3 years I'd known her, Cynthia only made Wellington when there was news to celebrate. "I hope everyone saved room for dessert," Cynthia announced, her perfectly manicured hand resting on her husband Douglas's shoulder. "Talia has something she'd like to share." Talia, Rowan's younger sister, practically vibrated with excitement. At 26, she had the wide-eyed eagerness of someone who believed the world existed primarily to deliver her happiness. Her boyfriend James, fiancé, as we were about to learn, sat beside her, looking both terrified and proud. James proposed. Talia squealed, thrusting her left hand forward. The diamond caught the light from the chandelier, sending prisms dancing across the white tablecloth. "We're getting married in June." The table erupted in congratulations. Douglas, Rowan's father, immediately stood to shake James's hand. Rowan offered a sincere "Congratulations, sis," while I smiled and added my own well wishes. "Let me see that ring," Cynthia cooed, taking Talia's hand as if appraising a piece of estate jewelry. "James, you have excellent taste." I watched the scene unfold with genuine happiness for Talia, despite our sometimes rocky relationship. She and I were different in almost every way. She was impulsive where I was methodical, loud where I was reserved. But she made Rowan smile with her antics, and family was important to him. "Evelyn," Talia called from across the table, "I'm going to need your help planning everything. Your wedding was so—" She paused, searching for the right word. "Memorable." I didn't miss the slight hesitation, but chose to ignore it. "Of course, I'd be happy to help." Later that week, Cynthia invited me to join her and Talia for brunch at the country club. I arrived 15 minutes early, as was my habit, and found them already seated on the veranda, mimosas in hand. "There she is," Cynthia said, her tone pleasant but her eyes cool. "We were just discussing venues." I slid into the empty chair, accepting the menu from a hovering waiter. "Have you decided on anything yet?" Talia sighed dramatically. "Everything is so expensive." And after Evelyn's wedding, she trailed off, exchanging a look with her mother. "What about my wedding?" I asked, trying to keep my tone light. Cynthia dabbed her lips with her napkin. "You certainly set the bar high, dear. The Fairmont, that custom gown, those imported flowers." Talia's worried about measuring up. My wedding wasn't about impressing people, I said carefully. It was about celebrating our relationship. Of course it was, Cynthia replied with a thin smile. But you have to admit, it makes things difficult for those who follow. The conversation moved on, but the undercurrent remained. Throughout brunch, I caught snippets of subtle digs about my lavish tastes and how some brides care more about the wedding than the marriage. Each comment was couched in just enough pleasantry to make objecting seem petty. By the time we parted ways, my jaw ached from forcing smiles. I drove home feeling drained, wondering if this was how the next 6 months would unfold. I didn't have to wait long to find out. 3 days later, my doorbell rang while I was in the middle of grading papers for my high school English class. Rowan was still at work. His accounting firm was in the middle of their busy season, so I answered the door myself. Talia stood on my porch, her eyes red-rimmed and swollen. "Can I come in?" she asked, her voice quavering. I ushered her inside, concerned despite my reservations. "What's wrong? Did something happen with James?" She collapsed onto my couch, her shoulders shaking. "It's the wedding. We went dress shopping yesterday, and I can't afford anything decent. Mom says we need to cut costs somewhere, and since the venue is non-negotiable." Fresh tears spilled down her cheeks. I sat beside her, awkwardly patting her shoulder. "There are plenty of beautiful dresses at different price points. We could look at sample sales or even—" "I want a dress," she blurted out. The words hung in the air between us. I blinked, certain I'd misheard. "My dress?" Talia nodded, wiping her eyes. "It's perfect, Evelyn. And you're not using it anymore. It's just sitting in a box somewhere, right?" I struggled to form words, my throat suddenly dry. "Talia, that dress, it was the last thing my mother and I—" "I know it was special," she interrupted. "But isn't family special too? Wouldn't your mom want it to bring joy to someone else now?" The manipulation was so transparent it almost took my breath away. "I don't think—" "Please," she begged, fresh tears welling. "I've dreamed about having a dress like that since I saw you in it. Nothing else feels right now." The front door opened, and Rowan walked in, his tie loosened after a long day. He took in the scene, his sister crying, me looking shell-shocked, and immediately frowned. "What's going on?" he asked, setting down his briefcase. Talia turned her tearful gaze to her brother. "I asked Evelyn if I could wear her wedding dress, and she's hesitating because it was her mother's final project before she died." I cut in, my voice sharper than intended. Rowan looked between us, his expression softening as he addressed me. "It's just one day, Ev. Let her wear it and feel special. It's not like you'll wear it again, right?" I stared at my husband, unable to believe what I was hearing. Just one day? As if the dress were a pair of shoes or a handbag to be casually borrowed. But Talia was already smiling through her tears, and Rowan looked at me with that pleading expression he used when he wanted to avoid conflict at all costs. "Fine," I said finally, the word tasting bitter on my tongue. "You can wear it." Talia squealed and threw her arms around me. "Thank you, thank you, thank you. You won't regret this, I promise." But something in my gut already told me I would. After she left, I confronted Rowan. "I can't believe you put me in that position." He shrugged, loosening his tie further. "Come on, Ev. It made her happy, and it doesn't hurt us. What's the big deal?" "The big deal is that dress was the last thing my mother created for me before she died. It wasn't just fabric and thread, it was her legacy. And now that legacy gets to continue," he countered, as if that settled everything. I went to bed early that night, too angry to continue the conversation. While Rowan slept soundly beside me, I scrolled through old photos on my phone, eventually finding myself on Talia's social media page. Out of curiosity, I searched for mentions of my wedding and found a post from 2 years ago, buried deep in her timeline. There she was, smiling in the background of a photo taken at our reception. The caption made my stomach turn. "Supporting the bro at his wedding. The bride's dress is pretentious and outdated, but at least the food was good. #family duty, #open bar." I scrolled further and found more subtle digs. Comments about my basic decorations, how my vows were straight out of a Hallmark movie. Each discovery felt like a small betrayal. The next morning, I called Nina, my best friend since college. Nina had never hidden her dislike for Talia's attention-seeking behavior, and I needed someone who would tell me the unvarnished truth. She did what? Nina exploded when I explained the situation. And Rowan just handed over your most precious possession without a second thought? He doesn't understand, I said, though the excuse sounded hollow even to my ears. No, he understands perfectly well. He just doesn't want to deal with his sister's tantrums or his mother's disapproval. Nina's voice softened. Evelyn, you have to stand up for yourself. That dress is your boundary to set, not his. It's too late. I already said yes. Then unsay it. Tell her you changed your mind. I considered this, picturing the inevitable fallout, Talia's tears, Cynthia's cold disappointment, Rowan caught in the middle. I can't. Nina sighed heavily. Then at least make sure she knows it's borrowed, not given. And maybe, she paused, maybe this is an opportunity to see exactly what you're dealing with in this family. Something in her words resonated with me. I wasn't powerless, I was just playing a different game than they were. And maybe it was time I learned the rules. You're right, I said finally. I'm going to let Talia wear the dress. But I'm also going to start paying closer attention. 2 weeks after Talia's unexpected request, I stood in my spare room watching her lift my wedding dress from its preservation box. Her fingers, adorned with freshly manicured nails, traced the delicate beadwork my mother had painstakingly selected. It's even more perfect than I remembered, she breathed, holding it against herself in front of the full-length mirror. I forced a smile. Just be careful with it. The seamstress said the beading is quite delicate. Talia barely acknowledged my words, too busy angling herself for a selfie. Can you take a picture of me with it? For my wedding vision board. Before I could answer, she'd thrust her phone into my hands and posed with the dress. I took the photo mechanically, feeling strangely detached from the moment, as if I were watching someone walk away with a piece of my soul. Thanks so much, Evelyn, she chirped, already examining the photo. This is going to be perfect. As soon as she left with my carefully packed dress, I received a notification. Talia had posted the photo to her social media with the caption, "Finally found my dream dress. Everything is falling into place. Hashtag bride-to-be, hashtag dream dress, hashtag perfect wedding." No mention of borrowing it. No mention of me or my mother. Just her dream dress. I was still staring at my phone when it rang. Cynthia's name flashing on the screen. Evelyn, dear, she began without preamble. I just wanted to call and say I think you're finally doing something decent for the family. Letting Talia use your dress shows real growth on your part. I pressed my lips together, counting to 3 before responding. It was a difficult decision, but family is important to me. Yes, well, it's just a dress at the end of the day. And Talia will make much better use of it. Her wedding is going to be quite the event. The implication hung in the air, that somehow Talia's wedding would outshine mine, that she would do justice to a dress I had merely worn. I'm sure it will be lovely, I managed. After hanging up, I returned to the spare room and knelt beside the now empty preservation box. Running my fingers along the acid-free tissue paper, I remembered something my mother had told me during one of our final dress fittings. I've sewn a secret stitch into the hem, she'd said, her voice barely above a whisper as the cancer sapped her strength. A little something only you will know about. When you wear this dress, that stitch will remind you of your strength, visible or not. It's always there. I'd found it later. A tiny, perfect knot in the shape of an infinity symbol, hidden where the lace overlay met the satin lining. My own private talisman. That memory fortified me as the weeks passed and Talia's wedding planning intensified. She began including me in ways that felt more like servitude than collaboration, asking me to research vendors only to dismiss my suggestions, inviting me to tastings only to ignore my input, sending late-night texts demanding I find solutions to problems she created. Through it all, Rowan remained oblivious. "I'm glad you two are bonding," he said one evening as I answered yet another frantic call from his sister. We're not bonding, I corrected after hanging up. I'm being used as free labor. He chuckled, as if I'd made a joke. It's just girl stuff, Ev. Wedding planning gets intense. This isn't girl stuff, I snapped. This is your sister manipulating everyone around her, and you refusing to see it. His expression hardened slightly. You're being dramatic. Talia's just excited about her wedding. You were the same way. I stared at him, wondering when he'd stop seeing me clearly. No, Rowan. I wasn't. As days turned into weeks, I began quietly documenting Talia's behavior, screenshots of contradictory demands, recordings of conversations where kind offers were met with criticism, notes about each time she'd taken credit for my ideas or twisted situations to paint herself as the victim. Not out of petty vengeance, but because something told me I would need this evidence eventually. One afternoon, I visited Marion, the seamstress who had worked with my mother on my dress. Her small shop smelled of fabric sizing and fresh coffee, a combination I'd always found comforting. Evelyn, she exclaimed, embracing me warmly. What brings you here? Don't tell me you're expecting already? Her eyes twinkled mischievously. No, nothing like that, I laughed. Actually, I'm here about my wedding dress. Her expression sobered immediately. The one your mother and I designed? Is something wrong with it? I explained the situation as carefully as I could, watching Marion's face shift from confusion to indignation. She demanded your dress? And your husband agreed. She shook her head in disbelief. Your mother would be turning in her grave. I know, I sighed. But I've already agreed, and taking it back now would cause more problems than I'm ready to handle. Marion studied me for a moment. So, what do you need from me? I was hoping you could make a small alteration to the dress. Something invisible, but meaningful. Like what my mother did with the infinity stitch. Understanding dawned in her eyes. A reminder that the dress is borrowed, not given? I nodded, relieved she understood without further explanation. Leave it to me, she promised. When she brings it in for alterations, I'll add something only you'll know about. Something your mother would approve of. That evening, Nina called with information that made my blood boil. You're not going to believe this, she began, her voice tight with anger. Talia did buy a wedding dress. An expensive one. What? I sat up straighter. Then why? She spent almost $4,000 on a Vera Wong at that boutique in the city. Tried it on 3 times, put down a deposit, and everything. Then she returned it the day before she came to ask for yours. How do you know this? The assistant manager at the boutique is my cousin's roommate. She recognized Talia's name when I mentioned the situation. Nina paused. Ev. She didn't return it because she couldn't afford it. She returned it because she wanted yours specifically. She told the boutique staff that she found something better. The revelation settled over me like a cold wave. This wasn't about money or family bonding. This was about taking something that mattered to me. I don't understand why, I whispered. Don't you? Think about it, Ev. Your wedding was beautiful. Authentic. People still talk about how moved they were by your vows, how the whole day felt like a genuine celebration of love. Meanwhile, Talia's always been the center of attention in that family. She can't stand that your day was more meaningful than anything she could plan. The next day, Rowan and I attended a venue walkthrough for Talia's wedding. The country club Cynthia had selected was opulent, bordering on ostentatious. Crystal chandeliers, marble floors, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking manicured grounds. Isn't it magnificent? Cynthia gushed, her arm linked with Talia's. Talia has such vision, doesn't she? She's thought of absolutely everything. I nodded politely, knowing full well that I had been the one to suggest the specific lighting arrangement Cynthia was now praising. Rowan squeezed my hand, oblivious to the undercurrents swirling around us. The flowers will be placed along this staircase, Talia was explaining to James, who looked slightly overwhelmed by the scale of everything. And we'll make our grand entrance right here. Just like Evelyn and Rowan did, I heard Cynthia murmur, only elevated. That night, I found myself staring at my favorite wedding photo, a candid shot of me adjusting my veil, sunlight streaming through the window, my mother's necklace visible at my throat. In that moment, I'd felt completely at peace, connected to her across the boundary of life and death. "I won't let them rewrite my story," I whispered to her image. "I promise." The invitation to help organize Talia's bachelorette weekend arrived via group text, not directly from the bride-to-be, but from her maid of honor, Ashley, who seemed perpetually overwhelmed by Talia's demands. "Help," the message began. "Talia wants a 3-day girls' trip to the lake house, but needs someone to handle logistics. Evelyn, you're good at planning. Can you take point on this?" I typed my response carefully. "Happy to help. Let me know what Talia has in mind." What followed was a flurry of contradictory instructions. Talia wanted rustic charm but make it luxe, activities that were adventurous but not sweaty, and meals that were indulgent but won't make me bloat before my final fitting. Each demand came with the unspoken understanding that I would make it happen and take the blame if anything fell short of perfection. Still, I saw an opportunity. 3 days in close quarters with Talia and her friends would provide invaluable insight into what I was truly dealing with. So I threw myself into the planning, securing the perfect lakeside property, arranging for a private chef, and organizing activities that struck the impossible balance Talia demanded. By the time we arrived at the sprawling cedar cabin on Friday afternoon, I had a quiet agenda of my own: observe, remember, and understand. The first evening passed pleasantly enough. The women, 5 of Talia's friends from college, Ashley, and myself, gathered around a fire pit overlooking the lake, drinking rose and sharing stories about the bride. I mostly listened, noting how each anecdote seemed to center around Talia's ability to get her way or outshine someone else. "Remember when Professor Mitchell gave you a B+, and you convinced him you deserved an A by crying in his office?" One friend giggled. Talia smirked. "It worked, didn't it? Men can't handle tears." "So true," agreed another. "Like when you wanted that apartment and the landlord had already promised it to someone else?" "Oh my God, yes." I showed up with cupcakes and a sob story about needing a fresh start after a bad breakup. Talia raised her glass in a mock toast. "Works every time." I remained quiet, sipping my wine and wondering if Rowan had ever been manipulated in similar ways without realizing it. The real revelations came on the second night, after several rounds of cocktails had loosened tongues and lowered inhibitions. We'd moved indoors as the temperature dropped, sprawling across plush sofas in the cabin's great room. Someone had suggested a game of Never Have I Ever, and the questions quickly turned personal. Never have I ever. Ashley paused dramatically. Had doubts about my fiancé. Most women kept their fingers up, but Talia surprised everyone by taking a drink. "Spill," demanded her college roommate. "What kind of doubts are we talking about?" Talia sighed, already 4 cocktails deep and past the point of discretion. "I mean, James is great and all, but sometimes I wonder if I should have held out for someone more ambitious." She twirled her glass thoughtfully. "Like, he's content being a high school coach forever. Where's the drive?" I felt a twist of sympathy for James, who'd always struck me as kind and genuine. "At least he's not spineless like my brother," Talia continued, oblivious to my presence. "God, Rowan is so easy to manipulate, it's almost boring." "Yes, Talia. Whatever you want, Talia. I'll talk to Evelyn, Talia." Her imitation of Rowan's voice was cruel and exaggerated. The room grew uncomfortably quiet as the women remembered I was there. "I'm just kidding," Talia backpedaled, her smile not reaching her eyes. "Rowan's great." "Really? Maybe we should play a different game," Ashley suggested quickly. Later, as everyone prepared for bed, one of the bridesmaids, Lauren, the quietest of the group, approached me in the kitchen. "I'm sorry about what Talia said," she whispered, glancing over her shoulder to ensure we were alone. "She shouldn't talk about your husband that way." I shrugged, keeping my expression neutral. "Talia says a lot of things, especially when she's drinking." Lauren bit her lip, then pulled out her phone. "I recorded it. Not to be weird, but I thought you should have it. You're way too good for them." She sent me the audio file before I could respond, then slipped away to join the others upstairs. That night, I lay awake in the small bedroom I'd assigned myself, listening to the recording again. Talia's voice was unmistakable, her words cutting, spineless, easy to manipulate. I get whatever I want from him. The next morning, using a temporary email address created from the cabin's Wi-Fi, I forwarded the recording to Rowan with a simple message. Thought you should hear how your sister really feels. I watched him receive it 2 days later. We were having dinner at home when his phone chimed with the email notification. His expression shifted as he listened, confusion, hurt, then anger flashing across his features. "What's wrong?" I asked innocently. "Nothing," he muttered, but his mood remained dark for the rest of the evening. The following day, he confronted Talia. I wasn't present for the conversation, but I received a furious text from her afterward. "Did you record me at my own bachelorette party? That's a new low, even for you." I replied simply, "I have no idea what you're talking about." Talia didn't pursue it further, likely unsure how to address the situation without admitting what she'd said. But the damage was done. A small crack had formed in her carefully constructed facade. That crack widened further when Cynthia called me directly, her voice tight, with controlled anger. "I don't know what game you're playing," she began without preamble, "but I suggest you stop. Talia is under enough stress planning this wedding without you stirring up tension." "I'm not sure what you mean," I replied calmly. "Don't be coy, Evelyn. Rowan mentioned receiving an anonymous recording. We both know it came from you." Her voice hardened. "Let me be clear. If you continue causing problems, you'll find yourself permanently left out of family matters. Is that what you want?" The threat was explicit, but instead of intimidating me, it strengthened my resolve. "I want the truth to be acknowledged, Cynthia. Nothing more." "The truth," she scoffed, "is that you've never fit into this family. Don't make it worse for yourself." After she hung up, I felt strangely liberated. The pretense of perfect family harmony had finally been abandoned, revealing the power struggle beneath. I decided to approach Douglas, Rowan's father, who had always been kind to me but remained largely in Cynthia's shadow. I found him at his regular Saturday golf game, timing my arrival for when he'd be alone at the clubhouse bar afterward. "Evelyn," he greeted me warmly, genuinely surprised. "This is unexpected." I sat beside him, ordering a club soda for myself. "I hope we could talk, Douglas, about the family." His expression grew guarded, but he nodded. "What's on your mind?" "I think you know that things with Talia's wedding have become complicated." He sighed heavily. "Cynthia mentioned there was some drama, but she didn't elaborate." He studied me for a moment. "You've always struck me as reasonable, Evelyn, not one for petty conflicts." "I'm not," I assured him. "But I'm also not willing to be manipulated or pushed aside." Something in my words seemed to resonate with him. "No, I don't imagine you would be." He took a long sip of his scotch. "You remind me of someone, you know. Not in looks, but in spirit." "Who?" "Myself, about 30 years ago." A rueful smile crossed his face. Before I decided it was easier to go along with Cynthia's wishes than to fight for my own. That simple admission created an unexpected alliance between us. Douglas, I realized, had grown tired of the control Cynthia exerted over the family. In me, perhaps he saw a chance to reclaim some of his own agency. "What would you do if you were me?" I asked. He considered the question carefully. "I wouldn't try to stop the wedding or create a scene. That would only cast you as the villain in their story." His eyes met mine. "But I wouldn't let them rewrite history either. There's power in truth, quietly but firmly spoken." Our conversation was interrupted by a text from Nina. "Call me ASAP. Found something you need to see." I excused myself and called her from the parking lot. "Please tell me you're sitting down," Nina began, her voice vibrating with urgency. "I'm standing in a parking lot. What's going on?" I was helping Ashley with some bachelorette photos for the wedding slideshow, and I found something on her phone. She paused dramatically. Texts between Talia and her ex, Kyle. Recent ones. And very, very flirty. My breath caught. "How recent?" "Last week. And they've been meeting for coffee." She told him the engagement was rushed and she's keeping her options open. I leaned against my car, processing this information. Does James know? I doubt it. But, Evelyn. Nina hesitated. What are you going to do with this? It was a fair question. Part of me, a small, vindictive part one wasn't proud of, wanted to expose Talia immediately. But a cooler, more strategic voice prevailed. Nothing. Not yet, I decided. Just add it to the collection. The collection? Of receipts, I explained. I'm not going to sabotage her wedding, Nina. I'm going to let her wear my dress, say her vows, and have her perfect day. But when it's over, the truth will come out. All of it. The morning of Talia's wedding dawned clear and bright, sunlight streaming through the windows of our bedroom as I carefully applied my makeup. Rowan had left early to help James with groom stuff, leaving me to prepare alone. In the quiet, I found myself staring at my reflection, remembering my own wedding day 3 years earlier. You can do this, I whispered to myself, the same words my mother had spoken to me before I walked down the aisle. The dress box sat on our bed, rewrapped in pristine white paper with a simple blue ribbon, my mother's favorite color. Marian the seamstress had returned it to me after making the alteration I'd requested, a knowing look in her eyes as she handed it over. It's perfect, she'd said. Invisible to anyone who doesn't know where to look, but it's there. I ran my fingers over the box now, taking a deep breath before gathering my purse and car keys. Unlike the other bridesmaids, who were meeting at Cynthia's house for pre-wedding preparations, I'd been assigned to deliver the dress directly to the country club where Talia would dress for the ceremony. The venue was already bustling with activity when I arrived, florists arranging elaborate centerpieces, caterers setting up stations, photographers testing lighting. I made my way to the bridal suite, the dress box balanced carefully in my arms. Talia's squeal of excitement echoed through the room as I entered. She was in a silk robe, her hair in hot rollers, a champagne flute clutched in one hand. Finally, she exclaimed, setting down her glass and rushing toward me. I was worried you'd be late. I'm right on time, I replied calmly, placing the box on a velvet settee. Just as promised. Talia barely looked at me as she lifted the lid, her focus entirely on the dress inside. It's perfect, she breathed, lifting it carefully. Everyone's going to be stunned. I watched as she handed it to her stylist, barely acknowledging my presence further. Thank you, she added as an afterthought, already turning back to her bridesmaids. You're welcome, I said softly, though I doubted she heard me. As I turned to leave, Ashley caught my arm. Aren't you staying to help her get ready? I smiled politely. I wasn't invited to. Ashley's expression fell slightly. Oh, I just assumed. It's fine, I assured her. I'll see you at the ceremony. Outside the bridal suite, I ran into Nina, who had arrived early to secure us seats with a good view. One look at my face told her everything she needed to know. That bad already? She asked, linking her arm through mine. She barely thanked me, I admitted as we walked toward the garden where the ceremony would take place. Just took the dress and turned away. Nina shook her head in disgust. Classic Talia. Always the goddess in white, even when she's wearing someone else's dress. Speaking of which, Nina continued, stopping us under the shade of a magnolia tree. I have something for you. She reached into her purse and pulled out a cream-colored envelope. For after. I took it, raising an eyebrow in question. Just something to remind you who you are when all this is over, she explained. Don't open it until after the reception. I tucked the envelope into my clutch, feeling strangely comforted by its presence. Thank you. Now, Nina straightened her shoulders. Let's go watch the show. From my seat in the third row, I had a perfect view as Talia floated down the aisle in my dress. The sight was surreal, the familiar silhouette moving on a different body, carrying a different energy. But as she passed by, I caught a glimpse of the inner hem where Marian had made her special edition, a nearly invisible line of thread that spelled out, borrowed, but never yours. The words brought an unexpected sense of peace. The dress might be on Talia's body, but its soul, the love my mother had sewn into every stitch, remained untouched by her performance. The ceremony itself was everything Cynthia had planned for, lavish, photo-ready, and meticulously orchestrated. Talia and James exchanged vows under an arch dripping with white orchids, while a string quartet played softly in the background. Cynthia sat in the front row, beaming with maternal pride, occasionally casting glances around to ensure everyone was appropriately impressed. I felt a presence beside me and turned to find Douglas sliding into the empty seat next to mine. Nina had discreetly moved over to make room for him. "Mind if I join you?" he asked quietly. "Of course not," I replied, surprised but pleased. We sat in comfortable silence as the ceremony continued until Talia began her vows. The familiar cadence made me sit up straighter, a chill running down my spine as I recognized my own words, nearly verbatim, coming from her lips. "From the moment we met, I knew you were different," she declared, her voice carrying across the garden. "You saw me, truly saw me, when I felt invisible to the world." My own vows, spoken 3 years earlier, echoed in my memory. "From the first time we spoke, I knew you were different. You saw the real me when I felt invisible to everyone else." I glanced at Rowan, standing as best man beside James, wondering if he recognized the words. His expression remained neutral, but a slight furrow between his brows suggested he'd caught the similarity. Douglas leaned closer, his voice barely audible. "I see you, Evelyn. I'm proud of you for holding your composure." His acknowledgement meant more than I expected. As applause erupted around us for the newly pronounced Mr. and Mrs. Walker, I felt Douglas's hand briefly cover mine, a silent gesture of solidarity that brought tears to my eyes. The reception that followed was a blur of toasts, dancing, and carefully choreographed moments. I moved through it with practiced politeness, accepting congratulations for my generosity in sharing my dress, deflecting questions about why Talia and I weren't closer. During a quiet moment between dinner and dancing, Rowan found me at our assigned table, sliding into the chair beside mine with 2 flutes of champagne. "For you," he said, handing me one. "You look beautiful tonight." I accepted the glass. "Thank you." He was quiet for a moment, watching Talia and James on the dance floor. "That dress looks different on her." "It's the same dress," I replied neutrally. "No, I mean—" He hesitated. "It doesn't shine the same way. When you wore it, it was like it was part of you." The observation surprised me. "You remember?" "Of course I do." His eyes met mine, troubled. "Ev, I've been thinking about that recording. About what Talia said." I kept my expression carefully blank. "What about it?" "She was wrong. About me being spineless." He set his glass down. "At least, I don't want to be." The music shifted to a slower song, couples moving closer together on the dance floor. Talia was laughing at something James had whispered, her head thrown back in exaggerated delight. The dress, my dress, catching the light. "I'm starting to see things differently," Rowan admitted, his voice low. "The way Mom and Talia interact with you. The little comments. The expectations. I should have noticed sooner." It was the closest he'd come to an apology, to a recognition of the dynamics I'd been navigating alone for years. "Yes," I agreed simply. "You should have." He reached for my hand, but I gently pulled away. "Don't worry," I told him, my voice steady and clear. "I've only just begun to tell the truth." His expression shifted, questioning, but before he could respond, we were interrupted by the announcement of the cake cutting. The moment passed, but something had changed between us, a shift in the foundation we'd built our marriage upon. As the evening drew to a close, I watched Talia twirl in my mother's creation one last time, blissfully unaware of the reckoning that awaited after her honeymoon. The dress would be returned, but the truth was finally emerging, and like the secret stitches hidden in its hem, it had been there all along, waiting to be discovered. The week after Talia's wedding passed in relative calm. She and James left for their honeymoon in Bali, a trip funded primarily by Cynthia and Douglas, while Rowan and I settled back into our routine, albeit with a new undercurrent of tension between us. He seemed to be waiting for me to explain what I'd meant at the reception, while I was waiting for him to figure it out on his own. The dress remained at the dry cleaners, where Talia had dropped it off before leaving for her honeymoon. "I'll get it back to you when we return," she texted, as if returning my most precious possession was an afterthought. 9 days after the wedding, I sat at our kitchen table with my laptop open, scrolling through the wedding photos that had been shared in the family group chat. I'd been collecting them methodically, along with the images from my own wedding 3 years earlier. Nina sat across from me, nursing a cup of coffee. "Are you sure about this?" I nodded, selecting the most striking pair of images. One of me in the dress on my wedding day, illuminated by natural light streaming through the chapel windows, and one of Talia in the same dress, posed artificially under the country club chandeliers. "It's time," I said, opening Instagram. No more secrets, no more pretending. The post was simple, the side-by-side photos, followed by a caption I'd carefully crafted over several days. Not angry, not accusatory, just honest. 3 years ago, I wore this dress as I married the love of my life, I wrote. It was the last gift my mother created for me before cancer took her. In her final weeks, she worked with a seamstress to design every detail, telling me, "This dress is your armor, Evelyn. Wear it with pride." Last week, I watched as my sister-in-law wore this same dress for her wedding. Many have asked why I would give away something so precious. The truth is, I didn't. I was asked, or rather told, that family means sharing, that it was just one day, that my memories and mother's legacy should be repurposed for someone else's moment. I agreed because sometimes loving difficult family means making sacrifices. But love shouldn't require erasing yourself. Kindness shouldn't demand your silence. Family shouldn't mean forgetting who you are. To all the women who've been asked to make themselves smaller for others' comfort, your story matters. Your boundaries matter. Your legacy matters. Stand in your truth, even when others try to rewrite it. I added a final line, quoting the words my mother had spoken to me. Every woman deserves to feel like the heroine of her own story. Nina read it over my shoulder, her eyes filling with tears. It's perfect. Not petty, just true. I took a deep breath and pressed share. The reaction was immediate and overwhelming. Within hours, comments flooded in, not just from friends, but from extended family members, acquaintances, even Talia's college roommates. Most expressed shock, others shared their own stories of family manipulation, and a surprising number admitted they'd witnessed the dynamics at play, but never spoken up. "This explains so much about that wedding," wrote one of Rowan's cousins. I kept wondering why Talia's vows sounded so familiar. By evening, my phone was buzzing constantly with notifications, private messages, and missed calls, primarily from Cynthia, whose increasingly frantic voicemails I ignored. Rowan came home to find me calmly making dinner, while the digital storm continued to rage. "What did you do?" he asked, his voice tight as he held up his own phone, where my post filled the screen. "I told the truth," I replied evenly. "Nothing more." Talia's devastated. Mom says she hasn't stopped crying since she saw it. I continued chopping vegetables, my movements precise. I didn't mention Talia by name. I didn't accuse her of anything. I simply shared my experience. "You know exactly what you did," he countered, but there was uncertainty in his tone. "Yes," I agreed, meeting his gaze. "I stopped pretending that your family's treatment of me is acceptable. I stopped carrying the burden of their actions alone." He ran a hand through his hair, clearly conflicted. "Mom wants you to take it down. She says it's humiliating the family."
No.
The simplicity of my refusal seemed to catch him off guard. "Evelyn."
No, Rowan.
"For years, I've watched you choose their comfort over my dignity. I've stayed quiet while Talia mocked our wedding, while Cynthia undermined me at every turn, while you stood by and let it happen. Not anymore." My phone rang again, Talia this time. After a moment's hesitation, I answered, putting it on speaker so Rowan could hear. "How could you?" Talia's voice was raw from crying. "You've ruined everything. People are calling me a thief, saying I stole your dress, your vows." "I never called you any of those things," I interrupted calmly. "If people are drawing those conclusions, perhaps you should ask yourself why." "Take it down," she demanded. "Take it down, or I'll sue you for defamation." I almost laughed at the absurdity. There's nothing defamatory in stating facts, Talia. I didn't lie about anything. Everyone's talking about me. On my honeymoon, people are reacting to the truth. I can't control that. Her voice dropped to a threatening whisper. You've always been jealous of me. Always trying to make yourself seem special, with your tragic backstory and your perfect wedding. Well, guess what? Now everyone will see how petty and vindictive you really are. Rowan's expression shifted as he listened to his sister's words, the mask of family loyalty beginning to crack. I hope you find peace, Talia, I said simply, and ended the call. The silence that followed was heavy with unspoken revelations. Rowan stood frozen, looking as though the ground beneath him had suddenly shifted. That's how she talks to you? He finally asked, his voice barely audible. When you're not around to hear it. Yes. He sank into a chair, staring at his hands. I didn't know. Or maybe I didn't want to know. Before he could say more, his phone lit up with a message from Nina. She'd posted a comment on my Instagram, attaching several audio clips, including the recording from the bachelorette party, where Talia called Rowan spineless and easy to manipulate. What is this? He whispered, pressing play. As Talia's voice filled our kitchen, cruelly mocking her brother, I saw something break in Rowan's eyes, the last remnants of blind loyalty crumbling away. There's more, I said quietly. Screenshots of her messages about our wedding. The evidence that she bought an expensive dress and returned it just to demand mine. The texts with her ex during the engagement. His head snapped up. What? I wasn't planning to share those publicly, I assured him. But I've kept everything, Rowan. Every insult, every lie, every manipulation. Not for revenge, but because eventually I knew someone would need to see the truth. That someone, we both realized, had been him all along. The next day, Cynthia called an emergency family meeting at her house, a transparent attempt to regain control of the narrative. I declined to attend, despite Rowan's plea that I reconsider. I've said what I needed to say, I told him. Anything more would just become a shouting match. He went alone, torn between old patterns and new understanding. Later that evening, he returned with haunted eyes and slumped shoulders. How was it? I asked, setting a cup of tea before him. Exactly as you'd expect, he sighed. Mom tried to paint you as unstable and attention-seeking. Talia cried on cue. Dad. He paused, a hint of wonder entering his voice. Dad defended you. This surprised me. Douglas. Rowan nodded. He told Mom that her treatment of you has been shameful from day one, that she encouraged Talia's behavior because it fed her own ego. His voice dropped. Then he told us he's updated his will and business holdings. Mom no longer has unilateral control over the family assets. The revelation left me speechless. Quiet, diplomatic Douglas, taking such a definitive stand. I asked Mom why. Rowan continued, his voice cracking slightly. Why she always favored Talia. Why she couldn't accept you. He took a shaky breath. She just said, Talia needed more. As if that explained everything. I reached across the table, taking his hand. Some people believe love is a finite resource, that giving to one person means less for another. That's not how it works, he whispered. No, I agreed softly. It's not. In the days that followed, my post continued to resonate beyond our immediate circle. Women reached out with their own stories of family dynamics, boundary violations, and the courage to reclaim their narratives. What had begun as a personal truth-telling had touched a collective nerve. Talia retreated from social media, her honeymoon photos abruptly ceasing. According to Douglas, who had begun calling me regularly for coffee, she and James had cut their trip short, returning to find many of their wedding gifts accompanied by awkward notes of concern or confusion. Cynthia made one final attempt at damage control, hosting a dinner party where she pointedly discussed Talia's generous heart and how some people misinterpret family traditions. Few were convinced, and several longtime family friends began quietly distancing themselves. Through it all, I maintained my silence, letting the truth speak for itself. I had said what needed saying. The rest would unfold as it should. The dress was finally returned 3 weeks after the wedding, cleaned, boxed, but somehow diminished by its journey. I opened the box alone, running my fingers along the lace and finding the secret messages still there. My mother's infinity stitch and Marion's borrowed, but never yours. As I carefully resealed it for preservation, I realized I no longer felt the same attachment to the physical garment. Its power had never been in the fabric itself, but in what it represented, the strength to stand in my truth, to honor my own story, to reclaim my voice. For the first time since my mother's death, I felt her pride washing over me, as real as sunlight through an open window. Spring gave way to summer, and with it came a season of new beginnings. Rowan and I had entered couples counseling, slowly rebuilding trust and communication that had been eroded by years of family interference. The process was painful at times, revealing patterns and compromises we'd both made, but necessary for healing. Meanwhile, an unexpected opportunity presented itself in the form of a vacant storefront in the arts district downtown. Nina and I had been discussing our mutual frustration with the wedding industry's emphasis on perfection over meaning, on trends over legacy. What if, Nina had mused one evening as we shared a bottle of wine on my porch, we created a space for women to find or repurpose heirloom gowns? Not just wedding dresses, but any meaningful garment with a story behind it. The idea resonated deeply. Within weeks, we'd secured a small business loan, signed a lease, and begun transforming the space into what would become Threaded Memories, a boutique specializing in the restoration and reimagining of heirloom gowns. On opening day, sunlight streamed through the newly installed skylights, illuminating vintage mannequins draped in carefully restored dresses spanning decades of style and sentiment. Each garment was accompanied by a small card telling its origin story: a grandmother's prom dress repurposed for a graduation, a mother's wedding gown transformed into a christening outfit, a beloved aunt's favorite cocktail dress preserved and displayed as art. I stood behind the counter, arranging a display of vintage buttons, when the bell above the door chimed. Looking up, I found Rowan standing awkwardly in the entrance, a small gift bag in his hands. "It looks amazing," he said, taking in the space with genuine admiration. "You've created something special here." "Thank you," I replied, surprised but pleased by his presence. "Nina's been handling most of the design elements while I focus on the restoration work." He nodded, approaching the counter slowly. "I wanted to be here today, to support you." The statement hung between us, simple but significant. After months of cautious reconciliation, every gesture of alliance carried weight. "I appreciate that," I said softly. He placed the gift bag on the counter. "This is for the shop. A small contribution." Inside, I found an antique sewing kit that had belonged to his grandmother, delicate silver scissors, a thimble worn smooth with use, and a collection of threaded needles preserved in wax paper. "Grandma Thompson was a seamstress," he explained. "Dad thought these should be here, with someone who understands their value." The thoughtfulness of the gift brought unexpected tears to my eyes. "Thank you. They're perfect." Throughout the day, a steady stream of curious visitors filled the boutique. Some came specifically for our services, bringing cherished garments in need of care or reimagining. Others were drawn by the growing reputation of our unique concept, a space that honored the stories behind the clothes we wear in significant moments. Douglas arrived mid-afternoon, distinguished and slightly out of place among the predominantly female clientele, but beaming with pride as he took in what Nina and I had created. "This is remarkable," he said, embracing me warmly. "A fitting tribute to your mother's legacy." "You've been a big part of making this possible," I reminded him, grateful for both his emotional and financial support during the planning stages. He waved away my thanks. "I'm just making up for lost time. For years of sitting quietly while Cynthia—" He trailed off, shaking his head. "Well, that's in the past now." The separation between Douglas and Cynthia had shocked many in their social circle, but to those who had witnessed the dynamics over the years, it seemed an inevitable evolution. He had purchased a small townhouse downtown and was rediscovering interests and friendships long sublimated to Cynthia's preferences. "How is she?" I asked, not out of obligation but genuine curiosity. "Adjusting," he replied diplomatically. It's not easy to lose control of a narrative you've believed for 40 years. As for Talia, she had largely faded from public view in the months following her wedding. According to occasional updates from Rowan, she and James were working through things, a vague phrase that suggested the foundation of their relationship had been tested by the events surrounding their wedding. Her absence from my life brought neither satisfaction nor regret, just a quiet understanding that some relationships aren't meant to be salvaged. Some boundaries, once established, need to remain firm. Late in the afternoon, as the opening day crowd thinned, a young woman entered the boutique alone. She couldn't have been more than 22, with nervous eyes and hesitant steps as she approached the counter. "Can I help you?" I asked, noting how she clutched her purse strap like a lifeline. "Are you Evelyn?" she asked. When I nodded, she continued, "I read your post about the wedding dress and standing in your truth. It went kind of viral in my family group chat." I smiled gently, accustomed now to these moments of recognition. "I'm glad it resonated with you." "It did more than that," she admitted, her voice gaining strength. "I've been letting my mom and sisters plan my entire wedding, their vision, their choices, their idea of what I should want. Reading your words made me realize I was disappearing from my own story." Her gaze traveled around the boutique, taking in the carefully preserved garments and their accompanying narratives. "I don't want to wear someone else's idea of a perfect dress. I want something that tells my story." She straightened her shoulders. "I want to start with a dress that's truly mine. Can you help me?" I moved around the counter and took her hand, feeling an unexpected sense of completion as our fingers met. "Then let's start with your dress," I said, smiling. "But this time, it's truly yours." In the months that followed, threaded memories flourished beyond our initial business projections. Women began traveling from neighboring states, bringing garments with histories both joyful and complicated, seeking not just restoration but reclamation. Nina expanded our services to include documentary photography, capturing the stories behind each garment in images as well as words. We hired 2 part-time seamstresses, both skilled in vintage techniques that had nearly become lost arts. One quiet afternoon, Nina presented me with a shadow box she'd been working on secretly for weeks. Inside, mounted on cream-colored linen, was a small swatch of fabric from my original wedding gown, a piece I'd saved when Marion made the alterations before Talia's wedding. Beneath it, embroidered in Nina's precise stitches, were the words, "She remembered who she was." I hung it on the wall behind the counter that same day, a quiet testament to the journey that had led us here. Not a monument to pain or conflict, but a reminder of the power in reclaiming one's narrative. Customers often asked about it, and I shared the story openly, not with bitterness, but with the calm certainty of someone who had walked through fire and emerged stronger on the other side. As for my relationship with Rowan, we continued the delicate work of rebuilding what had been damaged and creating something new from the foundation that remained. Some days were easier than others, some conversations more productive than painful. But there was honesty now where silence had once prevailed, and recognition where blindness had ruled. My mother's dress remained in its preservation box, a chapter of my story rather than its defining moment. I no longer needed to open it to feel connected to her legacy. I carried that connection in the work of my hands, in the courage of my voice, in the boundaries I now maintained without apology. On the 1-year anniversary of Threaded Memories opening, I stood at the front of our expanded space, addressing a small crowd gathered for a special exhibition of heirloom garments and their stories. As I looked out at the faces, some familiar, some new, all attentive, I felt a sense of peace that had once seemed unattainable. "Clothes carry memories," I told them, my voice steady and clear. "They witness our most significant moments, absorb our tears and laughter, hold the imprint of our journeys. But the most powerful story isn't in the fabric itself, it's in what we bring to it and what we take away when we remove it." I gestured to the garments displayed around us, each with its unique history, each preserved or transformed with intention and care. "Sometimes, people try to steal your light," I concluded, echoing the words that had come to me in the darkest moments of my own journey. But your light? It was never theirs to wear. The room filled with gentle applause, and as I stepped away from the microphone, I caught a glimpse of my reflection in the vintage mirror near the entrance, no longer diminished by others' expectations, no longer contorted to fit into spaces too small for my spirit. I stood tall, finally and completely myself, wrapped in the most enduring garment of all, the quiet, unshakable knowledge of my own worth. What would you sacrifice to keep the peace? And at what point does your own truth become more valuable than family harmony? If Evelyn's journey resonated with you, please like this video, subscribe for more stories of quiet strength and resilience, and share in the comments a time when you finally chose to stand in your own power.